Hi, Matt DeMeo, Z Maestro, back with you again for another session of Instant Concentration. How to focus your mind in a world of information overload. Now, let's talk about how to leave a sharper, clearer imprint on your mind. We're going to look at how to gain instant concentration on any subject, no matter how difficult or boring the material is to learn. We're going to learn about something called M.S.P. Now, you've heard of ESP, extrasensory perception, but we're going to be talking about something normal and not paranormal, multi-sensory perception. It's called using multiple senses to receive information. So, finish this statement. In one ear and out the other, right? But seeing is believing. Well, we use these expressions very commonly, and we don't really give them much thought at all. In truth, things that you only hear really do make less of an impression on your mind than something that you see. However, what's far more powerful is when you combine hearing and seeing together. And that impression becomes far more powerful than either one by themselves. In fact, the result is multiplied. Combine hearing with seeing, and it enables your mind to absorb and retain the information far better than just using one sense alone. And as I said, the result is not just added, it's multiplied. You know, we know of a term called synergy. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Let's use a bicycle as an example. So let's say that we've got a whole series of bicycle parts laying there by themselves. However, when we assemble them together in a bicycle, the end result becomes vastly more usable, vastly more powerful, way greater than any combination of the parts just laying there on their own. Well, multisensory perception works exactly the same way. When you combine them together, the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. When you add the sense of touch, and wait a minute, how can you touch an idea? Well, you write it down. So if we have hearing and seeing by themselves, well, that's a great idea. It's not just added, it's multiplied, it's squared. However, when you do the same thing and you're learning the same information and you combine hearing and seeing and then you add the sense of touch, well, you're not just adding it, it's actually cubing the idea. So the power becomes vastly more important to you. So here's a couple of quick do's and don'ts. First, the act of moving your hand and arm in a pattern of lines and swirls is, in fact, touching that idea. So you don't want to just read your textbook, and you don't want to just reread your notes, or if you've recorded the lesson, don't just listen to it. Take written notes. Or if you prefer not to write on a pad, maybe you think that's too old-fashioned for you, these new tablets and these new tablet notebooks many times have apps on them that allow you to transform your handwriting right on the pad right into your computer. But whatever you do, you want to use your hand and arm and in the pattern of the lines and swirls, in fact, human writing. Now, in terms of staying focused, I believe that it's better to handwrite your notes rather than typing them up. Now, I wish I had some hard documentation to back me up on this, but I seem to have the observation that students of all types, no matter what their background is, do better. You see, when the mind goes through the actual complicated process of making your hand and your arm move in a very particular series of lines and swirls that we call handwriting, it leaves a much deeper impression on your memory. So let's say you're in a lecture, and maybe you don't even want to be there. Well, I would tell you, so what? You're there. Do what you're doing while you're doing it. And just like I talk about in my memory training programs, you've got to pay attention, pay attention. And you can only remember what you want to remember. So if you're stuck in a lecture, you might as well be there. If you're doing business on the phone, taking written notes stops you from just drifting off about what you're going to say next. Sometimes what people think of as listening is merely keeping quiet while the other person is talking, while you're waiting for your chance to jump in. I get into a lot of that in my series on X-ray hearing, how to develop super powerful listening skills. But when you take written notes during a business conversation or when you're in a lecture, it keeps you focused. You're forced to concentrate on what's being said. And why does taking notes work? Well, when you take written notes, I want you to see how the information flows. Now, I'll bet nobody has ever explained it to you like this before. Watch this. The first thing that happens is when somebody's speaking, the professor is speaking, or you're on the phone, or the business person that you're talking with, they're talking. The information now goes in your ear. And the act of taking notes makes it go out your hand. And then, because you see what you've written, it goes back in through your eye. Now, stay with me on this, because the information is now flowing in and out of you. It's forcing you to stay focused. It's forcing concentration on you. The information goes in your ear, out your hand, and back in again through your eye. That's a lot of movement. You see, multisensory perception ensures concentration. When you're combining your senses together when you're learning something, it forces you to employ greater powers of concentration. Taking notes forces you to focus, and it gives you far better retention. Look, even if you never ever see those notes again, the information that you just looked at or you just heard, it'll stay in your head far longer and vastly more clearly than if you had only heard it. And since we're talking about the five senses, so far we've only talked about three of them, but what about adding the sense of taste and smell? Is that possible? Well, if this were cooking class, it certainly would. Or there are certain courses and certain activities that as you're studying them certainly have particular smells. For example, if you're in the auto shop, or if you're in an art studio, or maybe if you're doing gardening, well, sometimes you can't actually physically taste or smell the activity that's going on, but if you're in a classroom, you can certainly imagine it. Using your powers of imagination to help you think about what something might taste or smell like as you're reading about it or hearing a lecture on it can certainly help you use those additional senses. When you're using your senses, more is better. The more senses you use when you're learning something, the deeper of an impression that it makes. The stronger your focus and your concentration. Join me in our next session on instant concentration.